Hello, and welcome to Week 4 of NMP 621, Introduction to Philanthropy and Fundraising Fundamentals. Well, welcome to week number 4. This is midway through our 8-week course. We are at the midway point, and it's always amazing to me how quickly these weeks go by. So be sure to let me know how you are doing. If you're experiencing any challenges or if you have any questions, please send me an email or call on my cell phone. That number is 845-380-0155, and let me know how you're doing. Today I'm just going to make a few brief remarks about the readings that we will be encountering in week number 4 to guide your reading. This week we will be looking at donor motivations, giving theories, and patterns for giving. We'll start off the remarks this week with a cartoon from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Often when Gene Temple was giving a talk or a lecture, he would always use cartoons to make some of his points. And this particular one is appropriate to our readings this week. As you'll notice in the caption, he is saying, charitable giving isn't the ultimate test of one's humanity, but it does give us some numbers to play with. So it's very appropriate because this week we are going to be focusing on high net worth donors. If you haven't had an opportunity to watch the presentation that Dr. Temple did at Bay Path back in January, I would advise that you take a moment and do listen to that presentation. It is very relevant to our work this week in week number 4. So as we begin our reading this week, we will be looking at those high net worth donors. And I'd like you to start to think about who are the major donors, particularly from your organization. Think about that. Who are the major donors to your organizations? And what does the funding process look like? So to start, I'd like to take some thoughts from an article, Giving and Getting, Philanthropy as Social Relation, an article that was written by Susan Ostrander and Paul Shervish. Some of the thoughts that they put forth in this article, the quote that you see on the screen, philanthropy is a social relation of giving and getting between donors and recipients, in which donors have needs to be fulfilled as well as resources to grant, and recipients have resources to give as well as needs to be met. So think about that for a moment. Their thinking in this article begins to talk about philanthropy as not necessarily being rooted in institutions or organizations, but in the relationship between the donor and the recipient. And that relationship is both transactional and transformational. And that relationship is, the giving is important in that relationship to both parties. And the key then is to think about how to foster those relationships so that there's a balance and both donors and recipients have positive outcomes to that relationship. The text that we will be looking at this week, you'll be reading the first 7 chapters, the first half, of the 7 Faces of Philanthropy this week. This is Another text that is a standard, and it is an older text, and so therefore, like the Bremner, it does have some limitations which should be thought about and acknowledged. There's much value to Seven Faces of Philanthropy, but there are some limitations. It was published in 1994, first published in 1994, which means that the research was actually conducted in the late 1980s, and so therefore there are some specific limitations to that research. You will be using, nevertheless, the Seven Faces of Philanthropy as you will be addressing this week's midterm question. This text, Seven Faces of Philanthropy, has been used in this course for a number of years, and it is a favorite of some of the past students. So I'm going to be interested to see how you feel about it. In the midterm, you're going to be asked to profile 5 out of 7 donor profiles that you will see in the assignment description instructions. And I'm going to ask you to determine which of the 7 faces profiles applies in each one of the 5 choices that you make. You might find in some cases that it's not a clear choice. Maybe there's a combination of these profiles that best fits. But nevertheless, I want you to really think about how you might use these profiles to describe and to establish relationships with these potential donors. One of the things some students have found that it is helpful to make a cheat sheet, as it were, of the 7 faces, and to list them with perhaps sub-bullets for the main characteristics of that particular profile. As an example, if you were listing the main features of the profile of the investor, you might list, as they do in 7 Faces of Philanthropy, you might list that investors give the same way they invest. Investors structure giving for tax advantages. Investors do not feel morally obligated to give. In particular, being affluent does not impose a moral imperative to give for the investor. And finally, investors believe that acts of philanthropy, not motivations, define the philanthropist. So you might think about making a cheat sheet for yourself. It's not a requirement, certainly, but just a suggestion as you approach the midterm. Again, let's talk once more about these limitations that you're going to find in the 7 Faces of Philanthropy. Certainly there is more recent research that is now available to us, and I'll be talking about that in just a moment. In particular, studies are showing us that the role of women as household decision makers is more definitive than perhaps is revealed in 7 Faces. So once again, we see that the role of women as decision makers or donors or philanthropists, the text does not fully address that. And there are certain contemporary trends that we're now experiencing that were not existing in the late 1980s, perhaps not even thought of. Increased giving to international causes, for example, or venture philanthropy and social entrepreneurship. Certainly now there is an increase in young donors of high net worth, certainly coming out of the tech industry. And there's a decreased giving to religion that's not reflected in 7 Faces. And there's also an increased use of family foundations as a giving vehicle, and also donor-advised funds. So I want you to think about these areas as you are reading Seven Faces. I'm sure you will find Seven Faces very helpful and very illuminating, but we will be interested in your opinion, and to be very honest as to how you like this text and whether you find the limitations are too much to overcome, or if you find that the profiles as listed in Seven Faces are more helpful than not. The other part of the reading for the week and the more current research comes from the Bank of America studies of high net worth philanthropy. We will be discussing these in the discussion forums. This is sort of counter to the Seven Faces. It's more current data. Each one of you will be assigned to read just one of these studies and to summarize it in the discussion forums, and then respond to your fellow students about the summaries of the years that they will have looked at. The studies might look intimidating at first, so I would start with the opening narratives. You'll find most of those functions as executive summaries, and most of the salient points will be found there. So take a look there first at those opening narratives, and then in your summary in the discussion forum you will just be summarizing the important points for your fellow classmates. And I want you to also think about, as you read some of the more current data coming out of these high net worth studies, how you might use this, how you might apply and use this data in your own work. So that's it really for the remarks for this week. Looking forward into this week number 4, you'll find that there are only 3 discussion forums. That's intentional to give you a little more time to answer the questions of the midterm more thoughtfully and more thoroughly. So please take your time, plan your time well, and do a really thoughtful and good job on that midterm. Next week, which is week 5, we will go back to 4 discussion forums. And also the assignment next week will be that donor interview. I did make an announcement about this a couple of weeks ago just to alert you, so that you would have an opportunity to plan who you might be interviewing and better manage your time. Clarification, you certainly can interview either a colleague or a donor from your own organization in order to complete this assignment, but I certainly would begin now, if you haven't already, to make arrangements for that interview and to conduct that interview so that next week you can plan your time well and use your time to write up your thoughts and your reflections following the interview. That's it, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say in the discussion forums. It's a lot of interesting and complex material this week, and good luck on the midterm. Please let me know sooner rather than later if you have questions, and I'll see you in the discussion forums. Thanks so much.